Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Nice to see you all. And it's a beautiful day. Gusty winds out of the south. So, those of you who tuned in early, as we say, heard the Namo Avalokiteshvara chant performed by the monastics at Plum Village. And last week we talked about Avalokiteshvara and a little bit about where the name comes from and who he or she is. So I thought we could extend that discussion a bit and focus on a sutra, the Lotus Sutra, that features Avalokiteshvara prominently, and especially chapter 25. It tells about the powers of Avalokiteshvara. This chapter of the Lotus Sutra is recited and, often in some Buddhist centers. It is it's memorized, and the entire chapter recited regularly in a chant form. And there's a section of it that is written as a verse. And I'm going to, violate one of the cardinal rules of online presentations and just read this. But as I'm reading it, I would invite you to listen to it as poetry. The background of this verse is that the Bodhisattva named Inexhaustible Intent is asking a question to the Buddha, and the Buddha is responding. So the Bodhisattva Inexhaustible Intent starts out, world-honored one, replete with wonderful features. I now ask you once again, for what reason that Buddha's daughter is named Bodhisattva, perceiver of the world's sounds? The world-honored one, endowed with wonderful features, replied to Inexhaustible Intent in verse, saying, listen to the actions of the perceiver of sounds. She responds in various quarters. Vast oath is deep as the ocean. Kalpas pass, but it remains unfathomable. She has attended many thousands and millions of Buddhas, setting forth her great pure vow. I will describe her in outline for you. Listen to her name. Observe her body. Bear her in mind, not passing the time vainly, for she can wipe out the pains of existence. Suppose someone should conceive a wish to harm you, should push you into a great pit of fire. Think of the power of that perceiver of sounds, and the pit of fire will change into a pond. If you should be cast adrift on the vast ocean, menaced by dragons, fish, and various demons, think of the power of that perceiver of sounds, and the billows and waves cannot drown you. Suppose you are on the peak of Mount Sumeru and someone pushes you off. Think on the power of that perceiver of sounds, and you will hang in midair like the sun. Suppose you are pursued by evil men who wish to throw you down from a diamond mountain. Think of the power of perceiver of sounds, and they cannot harm a hair of you. Suppose you are surrounded by evil-hearted bandits, each brandishing a knife to wound you. Think on the power of that perceiver of sounds, and at once all will be swayed by compassion. Suppose you encounter trouble. With the king's law, face punishment, about to forfeit your life. Think on the power of the perceiver of sounds, and the executioner's sword will be broken to bits. Suppose you are in prison, in chains and lock, hands and feet bound by fetters and chains. Think on the power of that perceiver of sounds, and they will fall off, leaving you free. Suppose with curses and various poisonous herbs, someone should try to injure you. Think on the power of that perceiver of sounds, and the injury will rebound upon the originator. Suppose you encounter evil rakshasas, poison dragons, various demons. Think on the perceiver of sounds, and then none of them will dare to harm you. If evil beasts should encircle you, their sharp fangs and claws inspiring tear, think on the perceiver of sounds, and they will scamper away in boundless retreat. If lizards, snakes, vipers, scorpions threaten you with poison breath that sears like flame, think on the power of that perceiver of sounds, and hearing your voice, they will flee of themselves. If clouds should bring thunder and lightning strike, if hail pelts or drenching rain comes down, think on the power of that perceiver of sounds, and at that moment, they will vanish away. If living beings encounter weariness or peril, immeasurable suffering pressing them down, the power of the perceiver of sounds, wonderful wisdom, can save them from the sufferings of the world. She is endowed with transcendental powers and widely practices the expedient means of wisdom. Throughout the lands, in the 10 directions, there is no region where she does not manifest herself. In many different kinds of evil circumstances, in the realms of hell, hungry spirits or beasts, the suffering of birth, old age, sickness, and death, all these, she bit by bit wipes out. She of the true gaze, the pure gaze, the gaze of great and encompassing wisdom, the gaze of pity, the gaze of compassion, constantly we implore her, constantly look up in reverence. Her pure light, free of blemish, is a sun of wisdom dispelling all darknesses. She can quell the wind and fire of misfortune, and everywhere bring light to the world. The precepts from her compassionate body shake us like thunder. The wonder of her pitying mind is like a great cloud. She sends down the sweet dew, the Dharma rain, to quench the flames of earthly desires. when lawsuits bring you before the officials, when terrified in the midst of an army, think on the power of the perceiver of sounds, and hatred in all its forms will be dispelled. Wonderful sound, perceiver of the world's sounds, Brahma's sound, the sea tide sound, they surpass those sounds of the world. Therefore, you should constantly think on them, from thought to thought, never entertaining doubt. Perceiver of the world's sounds, pure sage, to those in suffering, in danger of death, she can offer aid and support. Endowed with all benefits, she views living beings with compassionate eyes. The sea of her accumulated blessings is immeasurable. Therefore, you should bow your head to her. So that's the verse portion of chapter 25 of the Lotus Sutra, commonly recited throughout, particularly China, Asia, in China and Japan. So Rakshasas, by the way, are man-eating demons, and it's it's something that was these figures were passed down from early Hindu tradition. Mythical creatures, scary. They're all manner of them. People who play video games, I'm sure, are familiar with that term. So what do we make of this? It sounds really fantastical, doesn't it? It sounds like just pure magic or wishful thinking, that you can just say Namo Avalokiteshvara and the sword of the executioner will shatter and you will be safe. So were the people who wrote these verses in probably the early centuries of the Common Era, were those people and all the people in the centuries since who have revered and recited these verses, are they all just hopelessly naive? Just wishing to be saved from all of life's difficulties? Well, I really don't think so. I think the same afflictions that we're experiencing today, that are the same kinds of afflictions that they experienced then. They experienced fear and anger, hatred, jealousy, envy, pride, conceit, despair, despondency, restlessness. They experienced all of these. And with some reflection, it seems like most of the suffering we experience is internal. Most of the demons are internal. So, for instance, if you go for a doctor's visit and you receive the news that well, we've looked at your imaging studies, and I'm sorry to tell you, you have cancer. Well, you feel physically just, I mean, you're the same as you were when you walked in, but now you have this concept, you have this information that you're processing, and there are all kinds of internal afflictions associated with that. First, feeling of shock and fear, this cold, icy fear that you feel in your chest. Fear of pain, fear of loss, fear of incapacity. And then there may be other afflictions that arise later. Perhaps not so rational, like anger, like a feeling of injustice. Like, why is this happening to me? I mean, I don't smoke, and I always pay extra for the organic produce. I mean, why do I have this problem? It's not fair. Feelings of perhaps envy or jealousy of others who don't have this problem. Feelings of anticipatory grief. So all of these afflictions have been around as long as humans have been around, and we're very familiar to the people who wrote these verses and have recited these verses. And the style of the verse tends to exteriorize these afflictions, to create scenes that make tangible these internal afflictions that we experience. And to talk about this projected figure, this Avalokiteshvara, this perceiver of sounds, can come to our aid. So I don't think the people who wrote and recite this are hopelessly naive. I think that they are using a power that we all have access to, and that power is the power of transformation. The power to transform afflictions. And making use of a name, a word, saying a name, having an image, some image to help remind us of the power that is available. The source of this power, of course, is mysterious. But the power of it is inarguable. So all of these verses about coming to the aid of those afflicted have to do with transforming fear, anger, hatred, envy, jealousy, conceit, pride, all of the afflictions that we all are so familiar with, into compassion and wisdom. The Black Lives Matter protesters, people who organize those protests, are very familiar with the power of saying a name. So one of their chants is say their name. Eric Garner and Trayvon Martin, George Floyd say their name. And they also use the power of image, having a portrait, a representation of George Floyd's image. It's the power of language and the power of image to remind us and to transform our experience. So the Buddha talked about this in one of his very early writings, the Dhammapada. He didn't write it, he spoke it, and somebody else wrote it. In this world, hate never yet dispelled hate. Only love dispels hate. This is the law, ancient and inexhaustible. It's verse 5 of the Dhammapada. It's sort of expressed in a conceptual way. And is moving, but perhaps not as moving as chanting Namo Avalokiteshvara, or saying the name of whoever brings that power of transformation to mind for you. So I hope that this discussion of Avalokiteshvara just helps in some way to make these chants and these images, these mythical figures, more understandable. And not everyone is going to be ready, perhaps, to take up chanting Namo Avalokiteshvara on a regular basis. Some may just not be ready for that. Or they may want to substitute another ritual, another way of doing things. That's okay. But maybe it's helpful, maybe there's some benefit in just knowing that she's out there. So I think I'll stop there and see if there are any comments about, what you make of all this. How do you see Avalokiteshvara? What forms does she appear in your life, if she does? Or who is it that appears? Thank you very much.